What was found inside the cargo space of this truck shocked the world in more ways than one. Its ordinary, unknowing transport driver was unaware of what he was actually moving from point A to B. But when a minor road accident made the truck flip and spill its guts, there was no turning back. The accident that changed Luke's life occurred on a Wednesday evening. He was driving his truck down a side track of Highway 251 and was basically the only vehicle on the road. It was usually quiet here around this time, but then, out of nowhere, a deer ran onto the asphalt. Luke saw the deer quickly, but his reaction time was still too late to save the situation. He wanted to avoid hitting the animal at all costs, so he pulled his steering wheel hard to the left. The deer was avoided, but his truck wasn't as lucky. Luke lost control, and the truck tilted dangerously. Before Luke could process the situation, the truck had already slammed down on the asphalt with a loud slam. Fortunately, the rest of the road was vacant of drivers because this accident could have been much worse. Lucky crawled out of his cabin, aching and groaning, and then he saw it. His vehicle did not simply fall on its side. The collision caused the top part of his truck to open up, and with it, all of the cargo inside spilled onto the highway. Objects were scattered all over the road, and a large part of the greenery next to the highway was covered as well. Luke shook his head a couple of times to regain focus after the crash, and then he walked towards the mysterious contents of his own truck. "What is that?" he whispered to himself, as he found himself between the field of blue and white-colored balls that covered the highway. Luke was happy that his truck had not accidentally hit any other car, but the end result still left him dazed and confused. Was this what he was driving into town? More importantly, why was he driving this? Luke thought back to the moment of loading the truck earlier today, which was already quite strange. Usually, Luke was responsible for the entire transportation process. That meant loading the items himself, driving them to the end destination, and unloading them there. He always knew every detail about the product he was transporting. But when he arrived this morning, workers already stood there to take over everything. Luke signed some papers, and then took the entire loading part of the operation out of his hands. Luke was sent to an office on the other end of the property where he had to wait until they were done. It was unusual, and when Luke asked about it, they told him not to worry. According to them, it wasn't his concern. At the time, Luke didn't think much of it. He was happy with the help and took this loading time as a much-needed break after a long few days of driving. But looking at the spilled blue and white cargo now, it suddenly did not feel right anymore. Luck touched his aching back as he crouched next to one of the blue and white balls. From a distance, they looked like rugby balls, not professional ones, but the kind you play with on the beach. They were all in different sizes, but had the same color pattern. Luke picked on up, but when looking up close, Luke realized that these were not rugby balls at all. It was some sort of wrapping paper covering a hard package inside. Luke started tearing and breaking off this outer layer, but a sound was heard in the distance before he could reveal its innards. Luke looked behind him and saw a set of dimly lit headlights approaching his location. They grew larger quickly, indicating a hastened speed. Fast-driving cars were not uncommon on a highway, of course. But soon Luke would find out that this car in particular was there for him, and him alone. After a few extra seconds, Luke also saw the rest of the car as it approached. A large black SUV with tinted windows was driving toward him. It slowed down its speed as it got closer and eventually parked next to the flipped truck. Out of it stepped a dark-suited man. He made Luke nervous. And this mysterious and intimidating-looking man was not the only one to arrive. Within minutes, his truck was surrounded by at least 10 other cars with the same design. The men inside walked up to Luke without saying a word at first. "What's going on?" Luke asked, with a tremble in his voice. Most of the men present did not respond to Luke's question. They just stood there, like unactivated video game characters. That was until one dark-suited man stepped forward. He explained that they were police officers and even showed a badge to prove this point. "Please move away from the truck, sir." According to them, the crash site wasn't safe, and Luke was ordered to keep a large distance from his vehicle. "Do you have a friend that could take you home? It's not allowed for you to be here anymore, sir." Luke found the entire scene weird and confusing, but agreed that he couldn't stay. His truck wasn't going anywhere, and he needed to get off the highway. So hesitantly, he called his buddy Stephen so he could be picked up. Stephen agreed, but the officers had already assorted their dominance even before Luke could hang up the phone. They kept pushing Luke away, repeating their distance demand. When Stephen arrived with his car, Luke was already well over 300 feet removed from his transport vehicle. The suited men had set off a perimeter with yellow tape and were eagerly gathering blue and white balls. It was a weird spectacle, but nobody could have expected what was about to happen. "What's going on?" Stephen asked his trucker friend. But Luke replied just like he did to himself the entire time. "I don't know, man, but it seems very important. Let's get to your car quickly." Stephen watched Luke's face and saw that he was hiding something. Why did they need to go this fast? Luke quickly closed the door of his friend's sedan, and that's when he revealed why he was in such a hurry. One single blue and white ball had rolled down the road and had landed in a ditch 300 feet away from the crash site, and Luke was holding it right now. It was too tempting not to take, and with these suited men guarding his truck like hawks, it was the only chance he got to get some answers. Luke placed the ball on the back seat next to him and instructed his friend to drive away. "We will find out what's going on together." Once home, it was time for them to take some control. Luke walked toward the kitchen and placed the rugby-like ball on the counter before grabbing a sharp knife from one of the drawers. The two men stared at one another, taking turns and daring each other to open the mysterious object. "Don't be a chicken. You are the one who took it," were Stephen's final words to convince Luke that he should be the one. Luke agreed and used the large kitchen knife to tear the ball's outer wrapping. The blue and white layers slowly peeled back as Luke's hands trembled. It was like an onion with many layers, giving way to a new layer of protective wrapping every time one was removed. Whatever it was, they badly wanted it to be kept safe. After about 5 minutes of careful incisions, the innards were finally laid bare, and both men turned pale instantly. "You were transporting this, and you had no idea?" Stephen asked Luke while staring at his friend in disbelief. Luke simply shook his head as sweat kept dripping down his forehead. If he had known this, he would have never placed his signature on those transport papers this very morning. According to Luke's friend, there was only one thing they could do now, and that was to call the police. But before Stephen got the chance to reach for the phone, Luke stopped him. He knew that the highwaymen portrayed themselves as police officers. What if they control the cops? Or what if they actually are the cops? Maybe everything is corrupt. Either way, if we call them, they will instantly know where we are. And they will find us, Luke explained nervously. There had to be another way. And that's when the clever truck driver thought of something: the transport papers. The thing he regretted signing the most this morning was now the one piece of paper that could help them. Such reports always stated the loading and unloading addresses for transport and GPS reasons. So, if they knew where the truck needed to go, then maybe they could predict where it would go next. Luke ran to his coat and reached inside the chest pocket. "There it is," he said with sheer excitement. Luke laid the piece of paper flat on the kitchen counter and pinpointed the end destination of his trip. That's where we need to go. We need to capture evidence of what is going on there. Luke's friend reacted nervously, but could not deny that this was their only solution. If the police weren't going to help, they needed to do something themselves. The two men got into Stephen's car once more and drove to the address as fast as they could. On the highway, they passed the crash site again. It had already been fully cleared, and every sign of his truck was gone. After about an hour, the two men reached the GPS's destination. And there, they immediately struck gold. Luke pointed and saw his truck standing next to an old warehouse. Luke also recognized some of the men next to it. They were the same suited men who had driven him away from his truck before. These men would be vigilant and were clearly trained, so Luke and Stephen needed to be careful. They parked their car around the corner and watched from a safe distance. There are those blue and white balls again. Luke and Stephen saw how the balls were extracted from his truck and brought inside the warehouse. The suited man scanned the area constantly, clearly wanting no trespassers. But that wasn't going to stop Luke from trying. The bold man took pictures of the extraction process, and then even went a step further. As some guards turned their backs, Luke made a bold move by getting even closer. He wanted better pictures, and was now only 30 feet removed from the building's entrance. But this was a mistake. Luke was careful, but not careful enough, and accidentally stepped on a crate behind his dumpster hiding spot. Luke knew he had messed up and had no time to mend this mistake. Before Luke could even move his feet, he was surrounded by suited employees. They grabbed his collar and quickly found Stephen hiding behind a tree a bit further. They were busted and afraid of the consequences. Together, they were dragged inside the building and placed on a set of wooden chairs. The two frightened spies looked around nervously, trying to understand what place they were brought into. Most of the warehouse looked bare, except for the corner they sat in, which almost seemed like a lab of sorts. "We're so sorry! We've made a mistake!" Stephen yelled in full panic mode. But just like on the highway, the men did not respond. Shortly after, a man in a white lab coat walked into the room. He stood before Luke and Stephen and asked who they were and why they were there. Before answering, Luke analyzed the man. In contrast to the suited men, this man looked much different. He didn't have the same stern expression on his face. Instead, he looked calm and collected, almost friendly in a way. His voice was soft and inviting, and it convinced Luke to cooperate. "My name is Luke, and I'm the original driver of that truck outside." After that common introduction, Luke also explained the entire road that led them to this predicament. He revealed everything, knowing that hiding the truth was pointless at this point. They were at their mercy, and only the truth might save them. Stephen obviously got angry about Luke spilling the beans. "Why are you telling them everything? Don't you know you are also messing with my life? I was fine before you called me today. Now, I'm not so sure anymore." The lab man intervened and calmed both men down. Nothing is going to happen. The white coat individual ensured Luke and Stephen that they would remain unharmed, but he had to ask why Luke stole one of their blue and white packages. Stephen's eyes begged his friend not to answer. But yet again, Luke trusted the truth to save them and spoke his mind. The man with the white coat asked Luke to hold out his hand and show him the objects. He knew that Luke had brought it with him, and it was indeed so when Luke presented his palm. The lab man grabbed the objects from Luke's hand and placed both on the table between them. A clanging sound was heard when the objects hit the metal table, and both Luke's and Stephen's faces turned pale again. They were staring at a large number of syringes and a bag of pills. "What is it? Is it drugs? What is this place? Are you criminals?" All these questions left Luke's mouth. The man in the white coat laughed and stated that Luke was partially right. He explained that his name was David Larson. "I'm a chemist, and these items are indeed drug-related. They are ingredients of sorts, and they are protected by an unassuming ball-like structure. But there is nothing illegal about them." Dr. Larson invited the duo to stand up and guided them through his laboratory. He explained that he worked for the government, and in this hidden lab he worked to produce new types of medicine for tons of illnesses. And these syringes and pills are just one of the ingredients we require for that. Medicine components were shipped across the country daily in unmarked trucks like Luke's was. This cargo needed to be kept a secret because the ingredients in these shipments were extremely expensive and, therefore, a much-wanted target for black market criminals to steal. "One ball worth is well over $10, Dr. Larson said. "That's why we hide them in these blue and white balls, making them seem like normal beach toys. We keep the drivers in the dark, too. The fewer people know, the better. But now that you know, there is only one thing left to do. And it might even present some opportunities," Dr. Larson stated. Luke was asked to be their first official transporter. Dr. Larson smiled and created a job for him on the spot. "You will be working directly for the government and must keep this operation a secret. And you need to stop working for your old employer." That wasn't a problem, since Luke owned his truck. He worked for himself and did transport jobs for multiple companies. But with this development, he only needed to focus on one. He signed on the dotted line, and Stephen promised to keep quiet as well. From that point on, Luke transported medicine all over the country, helping to develop life-changing medicine in the process.